My name is Emily Thompson, and I'm 22 years old. I grew up in a small town called Maplewood, just outside of Chicago. My life had always been predictable and uneventful, at least until I met Jake. Jake Anderson was everything a girl could dream of: charming, handsome, and full of life. We met at a local bar where he was performing with his band. His music, much like his smile, had an intoxicating effect on me. It didn't take long for us to start dating. Everything moved quickly, too quickly, in hindsight. I was naive, I'll admit that. Jake had this way of making me feel like I was the only girl in the world. He'd whisper sweet nothings into my ear, promising me the world and everything in it. I believed him. I fell in love with him, head over heels. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had found my place, my purpose. But life has a funny way of pulling the rug out from under you. After 3 months of pure bliss, I found out I was pregnant. I was scared but also excited. I thought Jake would be too. I was wrong. When I told him, Jake's reaction was far from what I expected. He became distant, evasive. He stopped answering my calls and texts. Eventually, he disappeared altogether. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. I was left with a broken heart and a baby on the way. I spent weeks trying to find him, asking around, looking for any trace of Jake. But it was as if he had vanished off the face of the earth. My friends and family tried to comfort me, but their words felt hollow. They didn't understand the depth of my pain, my betrayal. Then, one day, while scrolling through my Reddit feed, I stumbled upon a thread about tracking down lost people. It was filled with tips and success stories from people who had found loved ones or those who owed them something. I decided to make a post of my own, detailing my situation. I wasn't expecting much, but I had nothing left to lose. To my surprise, my post blew up. People from all over started offering advice and support. One user in particular stood out. They claimed to have seen Jake in New York City. My heart raced as I read their message. Could it be true? Could Jake really be in New York? Armed with this newfound information, I made a decision. I was going to New York to find Jake. I needed answers. I needed closure. And more than anything, I needed him to take responsibility for what he had done to me and our unborn child. So, I packed my bags, said goodbye to Maplewood, and boarded a bus to New York City. As the bus rolled out of my sleepy hometown, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I didn't know what I would find in New York, but I knew I had to go. This was my only chance to reclaim my life and demand justice from the man who had shattered my world. Arriving in New York City was like stepping into another world. The city buzzed with energy, its streets filled with people rushing about their lives. I felt a pang of homesickness for Maplewood's quiet simplicity, but I quickly shook it off. I was here with a purpose. I checked into a modest hotel in Midtown, using what little savings I had left. The first night was a restless one, filled with anxiety and uncertainty about the days ahead. The city outside my window was alive and indifferent to my plight. The next morning, I set out to search for Jake. I started by posting flyers with his picture in neighborhoods where musicians and artists were known to hang out. I visited bars and cafes where he might have performed. Most people just glanced at the photo and shook their heads. It was disheartening, but I pressed on. Days turned into a week, and my frustration grew. I wandered through the crowded streets, feeling lost and increasingly desperate. One evening, as I was sitting in a small cafe in Greenwich Village, my phone buzzed with a notification from Reddit. It was a private message from a user who had seen my post. "Hey, I think I saw your guy performing at a club in the East Village. It's called the Electric Owl. He was playing guitar with some band. Check it out." My heart raced as I read the message. Finally, a lead. I thanked the user profusely and immediately made plans to visit the Electric Owl that night. The club was dark and filled with a mix of hipsters and music enthusiasts. The air was thick with the smell of beer and sweat, and the sound of live music pulsed through the room. I scanned the stage and the crowd, my eyes desperately searching for Jake. Then, I saw him. Jake was on stage, his guitar slung over his shoulder, completely absorbed in the music. He looked almost the same as I remembered, except his hair was longer and he had a new tattoo on his arm. A rush of conflicting emotions washed over me: relief, anger, sadness. I waited until the band finished their set and Jake stepped off the stage. My heart pounded as I approached him, my mind racing with what I would say. When he saw me, his eyes widened in shock. "Emily," he stammered, looking like he had seen a ghost. "Yes, Jake." "It's me," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." Jake looked around nervously, then nodded. He led me to a quieter corner of the club, away from prying eyes and ears. As we sat down, I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Why did you leave?" I demanded, my voice breaking slightly. "Why did you just disappear without a word?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely remorseful. "Emily, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to do." I freaked out. I wasn't ready for any of it. "Well, ready or not, you're going to have to face it now," I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. "I'm pregnant, Jake, and you can't just run away from this." Jake's face paled as he absorbed my words. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt again, but then he sighed deeply and nodded. "Okay, Emily, let's figure this out together." As we talked, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but at least now I had found him. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make things right. In the days that followed, Jake and I met several times to discuss our situation. We'd sit in quiet cafes or parks, talking about our future and the baby. I wanted to believe that he was genuinely sorry and ready to step up, but a part of me remained skeptical, haunted by the memory of how easily he had abandoned me before. One evening, Jake invited me to his apartment to talk more. I was hesitant but agreed, hoping for some progress. His place was a small, cluttered studio in the East Village. As I looked around, I noticed signs of his chaotic lifestyle: empty beer bottles, crumpled sheets of music, and half-finished paintings. "Emily, I want to make this work," Jake said, sitting across from me. "I've been thinking a lot, and I want to be there for you and the baby. I just need some time to sort things out." I appreciated his words, but I needed more than promises. "Jake, time is something we don't have much of. I need to know you're committed to this." "To us." He reached out and took my hand, his eyes earnest. "I am. I promise." Just as I was beginning to feel a glimmer of hope, there was a loud knock at the door. Jake's face immediately tensed, and he glanced nervously at me before getting up to answer it. I couldn't help but feel a surge of anxiety. Who could it be at this hour? The door opened to reveal a tall, imposing man in a leather jacket. He looked furious. "Jake, where the hell is my money?" he demanded, pushing his way into the apartment. I stood up, feeling the tension in the air. "Who is this, Jake?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake looked trapped, his eyes darting between me and the man. "Emily, this is Tony. He's a guy I owe money to. It's complicated." Tony turned his glare towards me. "And who's this?" "Another one of your problems, Jake." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was more than I had bargained for. "I'm his girlfriend," I said, standing my ground, "and I think you need to leave." Tony laughed. A cold, harsh sound. "Girlfriend, huh? Well, Jake, it seems like you're in deeper than I thought." He stepped closer to Jake, his voice low and menacing. "You better find a way to pay me back, and soon, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." With that, Tony stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room felt suffocatingly quiet in his wake. I turned to Jake, my heart pounding. "What the hell is going on, Jake? Who is this guy and why do you owe him money?" Jake sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I got mixed up with the wrong people, Emily. I thought I could make some quick cash to get out of this mess, but it just got worse. I owe Tony a lot of money, and he's not someone you want to mess with." I felt a wave of anger and fear wash over me. "You didn't think to tell me any of this?" What else are you hiding? Jake looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. I didn't want to drag you into my mess. I thought I could handle it on my own. But now, I don't know what to do. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of emotions inside me. Jake, you need to sort this out. For us, for the baby. We can't live with this hanging over our heads. He nodded, looking more determined than I had seen him before. You're right. I'll figure something out. I have to. As I left his apartment that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. Jake had promised to change, but could I trust him? And with Tony in the picture, how much danger were we really in? One thing was certain. This was far from over. The next few days were a whirlwind of emotions and plans. Jake was adamant about making things right, but the looming threat of Tony's wrath cast a dark shadow over our every conversation. I tried to focus on the baby, on preparing for its arrival, but the stress was overwhelming. Jake and I met again in a small, dimly lit diner in the Lower East Side. He had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. As we sat in a booth, sipping coffee, he laid it out for me. Emily, I've been thinking, he began, his voice low. I have some contacts in the music industry, people who owe me favors. I'm going to try to book some high-paying gigs, maybe even a small tour. It's not a permanent solution, but it could buy us some time. I nodded, trying to be supportive. It's a start, Jake. But what about Tony? He doesn't seem like the kind of guy who's going to wait around. Jake looked pensive. I know. That's why I need to act fast. I'll try to negotiate with him, maybe get him to give me more time. But Emily, you need to stay safe. I don't want you getting caught up in this. I felt a surge of frustration. Jake, I'm already caught up in this. We're in this together, remember? You need to be honest with me about everything. He reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it gently. I promise, Emily, no more secrets. The next few days were a blur of activity. Jake reached out to his contacts, managing to secure a few promising gigs. Meanwhile, I tried to keep myself busy by preparing for the baby and looking into local support groups for single mothers. The future felt uncertain, but I clung to the hope that things would get better. One evening, as I was tidying up my small hotel room, my phone rang. It was Jake. His voice was tense and hurried. Emily, we need to talk. Can you meet me at Central Park, near the Bethesda fountain, in an hour? My heart skipped a beat. Of course. Is everything okay? I'll explain when you get there. Just be careful. An hour later, I arrived at the fountain, my mind racing with possibilities. Jake was already there, pacing nervously. When he saw me, he rushed over. Emily, something's happened. Tony's been arrested. I stared at him, stunned. Arrested? For what? Apparently, he was involved in some bigger criminal activity. The police have been watching him for months. They finally had enough to take him down. A wave of relief washed over me. Does this mean we're safe? Jake nodded, a cautious smile on his face. For now, yes, but we still need to figure out our future. I want to be there for you and the baby, Emily. I've secured a few good-paying gigs, and with Tony out of the picture, we have some breathing room. I felt tears of relief well up in my eyes. Jake, that's amazing. I'm so glad. But we need to take things one step at a time. Let's focus on the baby and getting our lives back on track. He pulled me into a hug, holding me tightly. I promise, Emily, I'm not going anywhere this time. As we stood there, surrounded by the hustle and bustle of the city, I felt a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead was still uncertain, but at least now we had a fighting chance. Jake was back in my life, and together we would face whatever challenges came our way. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and a determination to build a better future for our growing family. With Tony out of the picture, Jake and I finally had the space to breathe and make concrete plans for our future. The relief was palpable. but we knew we couldn't be complacent. We had a lot of work to do to rebuild trust and stability in our lives. Jake threw himself into his music, taking on every gig he could get. The late-night performances and grueling schedules were tough, but he was determined to provide for us. Meanwhile, I found a small apartment in Brooklyn, close enough to the city for Jake's work, but far enough to offer a sense of calm and safety. As my pregnancy progressed, I started attending prenatal classes and support groups. I met other soon-to-be mothers who offered advice, encouragement, and friendship. It was comforting to be surrounded by people who understood what I was going through. One night, after a particularly successful gig, Jake came home with a surprise. He had saved enough money to buy a crib and some baby clothes. We spent the evening assembling the crib together, laughing and talking about our hopes for our child's future. "Emily," Jake said softly as he placed the final screw into the crib, "I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I promise you, I'm going to be the best father I can be. I want to give our child a life full of love and security." I smiled, tears of happiness filling my eyes. "I believe you, Jake. We've come so far already, and we'll keep moving forward together." Months passed, and the day finally came. I went into labor on a rainy afternoon. Jake was by my side the entire time, holding my hand and whispering words of encouragement. After hours of labor, our baby girl was born. We named her Lily. Holding Lily in my arms for the first time was the most profound experience of my life. All the pain, fear, and uncertainty melted away, replaced by an overwhelming sense of love and purpose. Jake stood beside me, tears streaming down his face as he looked at our daughter. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching her tiny hand. Life with a newborn was challenging, but we faced it together. Jake continued to work hard, and I focused on taking care of Lily and our home. We were a team, and despite the sleepless nights and constant demands of parenthood, we found joy in the little moments. Lily's first smile, her tiny fingers gripping ours, the way she looked at us with innocent wonder. One evening, as we sat on the couch, exhausted but content, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. "Emily, there's something I've been thinking about. I want to marry you. I want us to be a real family." I was taken aback, but in the best possible way. "Jake, are you sure?" He nodded, his eyes filled with determination and love. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you and Lily." Tears of joy filled my eyes as I nodded. "Yes, Jake, I'll marry you." Our wedding was a simple affair, held in a small park with just a few close friends and family. It was perfect. As we exchanged vows, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. We had been through so much, but we had come out stronger on the other side. Standing there with Jake and Lily, I knew that our story was just beginning. We had a future full of possibilities ahead of us, and no matter what challenges we faced, we would face them together. Our journey had been filled with twists and turns, but in the end, it had led us to a place of love, hope, and new beginnings. And for that, I was eternally grateful.